Does anyone in the audience think they know the difference between sci-fi and fantasy? No. Okay, well, in the course of this session, you are going to find out. No, I mean, I said, do you know the difference? It's nice to own up to something you know. Yes, so in the course of this session, you will find out. So let me just quickly introduce the authors. I mean, you already heard what they've done. We are actually sitting by the poolside, and soon an alien ship is going to land, and small green creatures are going to emerge from this ship, and they're all going to offer us all sweeties. You know, that's what sci-fi is all about. And the fantasy, well, you'll find out more. Right. So actually, the thing about the books that you're going to be hearing about today and the works that you're going to be hearing about today is that they all really investigate their characters and their situations with a great deal of depth. And so in that sense, they're unlike, well, I'm not going to diss anything, but they're unlike the sci-fi of my growing up, which while it had, all of this stuff that was happening, you never really wondered exactly who the person was, or you didn't often. So I think that these books all really get into both the character, the geography, the situation, the relationship that they're all investigating. We have with us 4 authors, and I'm obviously not going to begin with Kiran, who I was going to begin with. So I am going to start with you, Manjula, since you're on my right, for whatever rationale that is. Now, you use the intensity of short fiction in this book that we are going to be speaking about, which is a form I have a particular affinity to maximum effect in these stories, because you use humor, you use fear, you use, in some stories, unabashed sci-fi elements to create these narratives that kind of blow one's mind. Your very first story, it was incredible. And you think to yourself, should I be terrified? Should I be comforted? And you have these beautiful kinds of statements, like when you're talking about pain and pleasure, in this case, in pleasure, it's a glory, a fathomless bliss that neither you nor anyone of your entire generation can know. And if you're not all intrigued by that, you should be, and go out and buy her book. So why sci-fi? Why do you step outside of the real world in that sense?
Thank you so much for that introduction, Indira, and thank you, BLF, for inviting me and the rest of us here. To answer your question, which is a question I think many SF authors are asked, why do you write science fiction? And again, this is something I've said many times. I write SF because I'm more comfortable in an alternate reality than the world in which we live, because it is easier to be faulted when you're writing about reality, because anyone else can point out that, oh no, there's no road named that in Delhi or whatever. Whereas when you're writing science fiction, you're creating your world, you can set up the parameters. And for myself, because I didn't grow up in India, I have routinely made the point that coming back to India as a teenager, I felt like an alien. And initially I would have said, I think as a young person, I felt slightly upset about that. But I quickly adjusted, and I'm much happier being an alien. And I live in the US. I am comfortable being an outsider, and I enjoy the sense of going back and forth. I come to India fairly often. In India, I'm routinely treated as if I don't belong, and that's fine. I'm not one of those people who is uprooted and then constantly fret about wanting to get back to my roots. I don't miss the food. I don't miss anything much, really. I'm happy wherever I am. So I'm kind of very happy to be in Bangalore. I had a family home here as a child, and it's wonderful to be here. It's certainly a thrill. I won't sing the song. Giving this back to...
Okay. Yes. Sorry. Yes, actually, now that you have the mic, Sebastian, you have the power, so I shall ask you. I heard that Manjula was reading your works in French, and I wish I could say I had done that too. But if I had started reading your works in French, we would be having this session, maybe next year, because I'm awfully slow. But I have attended other presentations by you in the course of your stay in Bangalore, and I recognize that much of your work revolves around the social conditions that your characters are encountering. So why do you need to step out of the reality if you're actually investigating social conditions?
Hello, everyone, and thank you for the invitation, of course. When I was a little boy, I used to be a liar, and because I don't have any friends, and to try to update myself, I tell stories, I tell lies, and maybe it's the point why I started to write stories. And today, all my books started by the same sentences, which is inspired by fake story. And then suddenly I decided to write noir literature, which is crime stories, but by the social way. So I knew it would be a hard way to write, because I have to speak about all the problem of the world, or the problem of the society, or the black side of the society. And so, like a kind of reflex, because I'm not a sad person at all, and I like the life, I like to laugh. I had this reflex to tell my stories by the humor side. So I do think it's my way to watch this world by that kind of lens, that kind of black comic lens, and try to study and to show all those problems we are submit to every day.
Thank you. Now that we are grown up, we don't call those lies anymore, we call it fiction.
But we are all liars here. We are the biggest liars in the universe. Every artist is a liar.
Exactly. Or
it's not a sin.
Yes. I just wanted to sort of follow up on that. And you said you write stories based on social situations and what people are going through. And if your work were to be translated from French into English and read in India, do you think that would make sense here, this reality here?
I suppose so, because I've read some Indian author, I've read some German author, I've read some Japanese author, American author. I mean, in black literature or any kind of other gender of stories, and I do discover a society, but I do think that we share the same problem.
So in that sense, I guess it kind of leads to sci-fi, fantasy, speculative fiction things, where yes, you are writing about different worlds, but maybe you share or understand or at least see the reality of that existence from your own perspective. So I come to you, Tarshan, because in most of the other works here, they're set in this world, and they're stepping out into another world to somehow complete or rationalize their stories, or tell their stories. So the narrative takes you out somewhere else. But in your work, in this particular work that we're talking about, we are actually in a completely other existence. So would you like to tell us how that sort of came about? Because it's unlike your previous novel, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're discussing my novel, The Mad Sisters of Essie. It's got a massive pink whale on the cover. And it's a cosmic whale, and it's set in a completely alternate universe. And it moves across multiple landscapes. There's a shape-shifting island. There's a place that has a festival of madness. Essentially, it's reality completely twisted on its head. And I've often been asked why, right? Why move away so completely from the real world that there's no grip in it at all? And I think as I was writing this book, I found more and more that if I wanted to access what's at the center of how we live, the life underneath the surface level life that we live, the best way in which to bring that to the light and the best way to bring that out was through madcap alternate reality worlds, where you sort of mashed up logic and you shredded ideas of what is possible and what isn't. And you just kind of pushed the boundaries of where everything can go, because that allowed me to touch more clearly, I think, the nerve of life is the best way I can describe it, right? The nerve of life. So for me, fantasy is very much a portal through that. Piranesi by Susanna Clarke it's literary, but it is fantasy, and it's a way to interrogate us far more deeply through the lens of the other and through the lens of the unreal.
Thank you. So maybe then I should just sort of ask you what your idea is about the difference between fantasy and sci-fi, and then we'll go to Manjula and ask her.
I have a terrible answer for this, Manjula, because I don't think there is very much difference. I find, so this is set in space, but it is very much inspired by fantasy, and it's inspired by fantasy because of language and how that language is used. And maybe because I'm a terrible scientist, I don't really see a great distinction between the two, but I find the boundaries kind of all blur into speculative fiction and slipstream for me. So I think you're much better placed to answer this in depth.
I wouldn't know that I'm better placed. But for me, when I was putting together the stories for this book, these are most of these stories were already published, have been published before. And while planning, while writing the introduction, I realized that I could make the point that about half of them are what I would call soft science fiction, not quite fantasy. Because as far as I'm concerned, something is definitely fantasy if it goes to magic, if it goes to the supernatural. Then it's definitely fantasy. I mean, according to distinctions. I haven't, I mean, I have one story with a vampire, so then that would shade into fantasy. But otherwise, soft science fiction is where we are going to be dealing with emotions, with social realities, and a little tweak on the reality that we know. Some of my work is so close to reality that it might as well be, except maybe not this year, but maybe 10 years in the future. I would say one of the distinctions is, it's not a tight distinction, but one of them is science fiction could happen. Fantasy may not, though we would like it to.
I'm not even sure I completely agree with that. Because after all, well, first of all, the fact that you're going magic, anyway, so let's not argue this, we'll move on from that. You know, one of the reasons why I'm interested in speculative fiction is because I write speculative fiction, and one of the reasons I am interested in moving outside of the plain reality that we are in is because I actually used to deal with facts before, which was because I was a scientist. and then somehow you have to make that leap of imagination anyway to ground your data and make some sense of all of the stuff that you read from life and space. And so it makes sense then to allow that imagination to be grounded somehow in data that's fed also from human relationships and responses that we have to each other and to society. I don't know if that made any sense at all. So I have a question for you, Sebastian. I'm just going to go round and round. Now, many of your characters are young, is that right?
How many, sorry?
Some of your characters are not old. They're younger people.
Yes, I write stories for young people too. And in those stories, my main character are young and they are not stupid. I don't mean, in my adult stories, most of my characters are quietly stupid. But I don't know why, but when I'm writing for the youth, the young public, my young character, they are not stupid at all. They are clever. They've got so messy adults around them that they have to carry all the responsibilities on them. So they are the main engine of the story. Adults are messy all around.
And do these, when you have these young, clever characters, are they conscious of lifting off from reality? Are these conscious steps?
They have to. They have to. It's such a garbage all around that they have to be very clever. And maybe I have that vision of the new generation today, that they have to be clever. They don't have choice to have too much fun, as we did, in fact. I really enjoyed my youth. But now the world is so awful that I do think that young people have to be really, clever quickly. You know, like the little holes that just after the deliverance, they have to know how to walk and how to run.
Oh, thank you for that. That's harsh. Actually, I'm going to swing back this way, if that's okay. And then I do have a question I'll pass it on to you. In many of your short stories, it's kind of a mystery. The character has to figure out that they have this, or they're conscious and have to hide their abilities of being aware of stuff that everybody else is. Is that kind of a conscious choice, or is that just something that emerges in the course of your writing?
I wouldn't. It's not a characteristic that I would identify. I approach writing stories, especially if they're short stories, like putting together a puzzle. I have most of the stories in this book were written to commission. That is, somebody or some magazine, or usually a magazine, would write to say they want a story, and they'll give me a word count, 2,000 or 3,000 words or whatever. And that, for me, it's something I like. I like to be triggered. It gives me a trigger to set into a story. For me, that word count, 3,000, 5,000, 2,000, it's like a puzzle. How do I fit all the elements that I want to bring into a story into this small space? And that puzzle carries me through whatever it is that happens in the story. I write stories that typically do have a start and a finish. I like stories that have a slightly surprise ending, and I work towards that. So and I don't especially analyze my work. So if you tell me that this is what you've seen, I accept that.
Thank you. Now, I feel a sort of particular pleasure in talking to Tarshan because her very first published short story came out in Out of Print, so I feel kind of excited to see what wondrous things you're doing now. So tell me a little bit about the Mad Sisters, and especially I think what interested me also was the geographic spaces that you created in which your characters are residing, you know, because that's really zooming out into, yeah.
So I think one of the questions I have been asked is very much this: why so many worlds within this book? Why move so many places? It's got an inventive, slightly crazy structure. Why choose that structure? Why start in the middle of a cosmic whale? I think what I was trying to do very much with this book, which is so different from that short story I sent you all the way back from Out of Print, was I do think that the world we live in is wild and it's vast and it's overwhelming. And I think we put constructions on it in order to learn to survive it, in order to learn to navigate it, basically to make sense so that we can sort of keep on living. And I was really curious about what it would look like if you just peeled those constructions away a little bit, if you kind of showed everybody the chaos a little bit more, if you had to stare that sort of wildness in the eye, what would that look like? And in order to make my characters do that, I had to create a universe with universes in it. I had to create places that consistently destabilize them, that consistently push them to the edge of understanding. And then I asked a question that I love and I care very deeply about. When everything is chaos, what exactly do you hold on to? What choice do you make? What is that thread that keeps you bound, that keeps you sane, that keeps you connected? And I basically wrote a very, very long book in order to find out. It's 120,000 words. It's definitely very fat. But yeah, that was the whole journey of exploration that I went on.
Thank you. So you're not a word count person like Manjula.